In the last video, I talked about moving to Tennessee. Here, I'm actually standing in one of the beautiful state parks in Tennessee, Natchez Trace State Park. This park and this lake actually has some significance to my cybersecurity career, but not quite yet. When I last left, I had just moved to Tennessee to become a network engineer at the University of Tennessee Medical Center Hospital in Knoxville, Tennessee. I never worked for a hospital, but then again, I was early in my career, I could adjust, and it was a teaching hospital, so I was doing kind of an extension of the university work. I really enjoyed it because it gave me an opportunity to actually plan and design networks, in addition to doing other troubleshooting items. One of the coolest things that I did back then, and it was cool back then, was to use some great new technology to allow for someone who has a wireless Ethernet connection, which was a new thing at the time. We had these big these big wireless cards that you could plug into the PC, and to roam between subnets. Now I know today, anything with regards to roaming is it's all handled in the background. You can roam between Wi-Fi and 5G and 4G, and you can roam between Wi-Fi hotspots and this and that, but back then it was really a new and exciting technology, and that's one of the reasons why I took the job, because I really was into this sort of stuff. Other things during that time, this is during the time when certifications began to become something important to me. During that time, I learned how to be a Novell server, a Novell network administrator. Some of you may not remember Novell or weren't born when Novell was actually of relevance, but that was really the file server type application back in the day. I became a NetWare CNE, a certified network engineer, or a certified Novell engineer, excuse me. So many acronyms in our industry, right? Also during that time is when I got introduced into Cisco certification. And I don't remember exactly if I actually completed courses to reach the certification or if it was just a matter of completing the courses themselves for the knowledge. But regardless, I remember taking a lot of Cisco courses because I was administering Cisco routers. This was also a time when my Linux experience, which I hadn't really talked about, came into play a bit. There was an application that was used for coding at the hospital, and I happened to be the only one on the network engineering staff that had significant Linux experience, and this coding platform was on a Linux server. So I became the administrator of that. I also remember that back in the day, this is before Windows 95, and in order to have a Windows 3.1.1 computer connect to the internet, it didn't have a native TCP/IP stack with it. And we used something called Chameleon, which again, I use the term back in the day too often, it seems like, but for that time, it had like an amazing suite of features. You could run a web server on your machine, email, all sorts of things associated with stuff that we take for granted now, and probably would be now a security administrator's nightmare because of the things it opened up. So I was Chameleon administrator. That's what we used in the hospital as far as implementing our TCP/IP stack at that time, before Windows 95. I was talking about certifications too. This was also, I call this time the golden age of networking. And the reason why I say that is that here you had computer networking that was just starting to go from this little small niche of like universities and such into broad use across a variety of industries, maybe not so much in the mainstream. The mainstream, like folks connecting at that point in time, it was still like CompuServe or AOL, and it was via modem and the typical dial-up with the sounds and all of that. No high-speed internet to the house. In fact, when I was working for the University of Tennessee, one of the perks was that I needed for my job to have an ISDN line installed in my house, which also meant that I had high-speed internet at my house, high speed compared to what was available at the time. And that was absolutely fabulous. I mean, great perk back then. But as far as certifications go, one of the certifications was attached to part of what was representative of this golden age of networking, and that was the Interop show that was in Las Vegas every year. Now, I had the pleasure of going there several times during the 90s, and what Interop was about was to demonstrate interoperability between different network components. Now, you might think today that, well, you know, that's old hack, of course. But back then, there was a lot of competition as to who would win the networking battles, if you will. I remember, wasn't there something like 100 any LAN or any VLAN, or not VLAN, any LAN? I think there's a G in there or something. I think HP put that forward. There was a lot of poor implementations of the standards that were coming about at the time. And the Interop was basically born to show that you could use these applications on a common network, which was, Interop actually built a network out at the show. I had volunteered one year to be part of that build out, and I can't remember why. For whatever reason, it didn't work out. I think it was a matter of timing that I couldn't make it to Interop that year, but I sorely miss having done that, because that would have been a huge experience. But anyway, Interop was a fabulous experience, and at Interop was this one training course from a company called Pine Mountain Group at the time. And Pine Mountain Group had this, I think it was the first vendor agnostic network training. So it wasn't your Cisco's, it wasn't your Novell's. Windows NT didn't exist at this point in time. It was truly agnostic. It was through this training that I really learned a lot about what would become the foundation for what you all think about as cyber today, and, you know, offensive security courses and all of that. Basic stuff such as analyzing packets and data flows and understanding the OSI model. I mean, you have to understand, these are things that are 30 years old and then some. So back then it was new, golden age of networking. Pine Mountain Group's certifications, they had the certified net analyst and certified net expert, I think it was, or is net something or another. And I remember I achieved both of those, and it was a difficult course to do for both of them. I loved my time at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, at the hospital. Learned an awful lot. Learned a lot about different applications and, generally speaking, how to integrate them all together. But as time went on, I really began to feel more and more that I was made for something else, that I was made perhaps to be more of an overseer of the network group. And an opportunity came up that would lead me to another town, to another place that I'd never heard of, that you probably never heard of either. It's Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And I'll talk about that in the next video.